Welcome to another critical situation report. This is Max AfterWar. What you're watching unfold in the Middle East right now isn't just another regional flare-up. It's the rapid, irreversible unraveling of a high-stakes American and Israeli strategy that was supposed to deliver regime change in Tehran. Former U.S. Marine intelligence officer and former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter recently warned, this operation has already gone dangerously wrong from the very first moves. According to a breaking New York Times report, the United States has already lost 7 American service members in just the first week of fighting. Following devastating strikes on its critical oil facilities, Iran has responded with overwhelming force, boosting ballistic missile attacks by over 20% and drone strikes by a
very major targets, and we've left some of the most important targets for later in case we need to do it. If we hit them, it's going to take many years for them to be rebuilt, having to do with electricity production and many other things. So we're not looking to do that if we don't have to. But they're the kind of things that are very easy to hit, but very devastating if they are hit. We are waiting to see what happens before we hit them. We could take them all out in one day, but it's all resulting in a 90% decline in various things, but in particular, Iranian missile launchers and 83% drop in drone launchers, as you know.
Staggering 100%. American bases across the Gulf, along with key strategic targets inside Israel, are now under sustained, coordinated Iranian salvos. The situation is escalating far faster than Washington ever predicted, but here's what should truly concern every thinking American. While American bases burn and our service members are coming home in flag-draped coffins, the Trump administration and its media allies are treating the American public like children who can be fed the same scripted line over and over again. Oil prices have exploded more than 90% since December. Brent crude, which was trading in the mid-50s just a few months ago, is now pushing toward triple digits, and analysts warn it could hit $200 a barrel if the Strait of Hormuz comes under sustained pressure. That is not a minor disruption. That is an economic earthquake rolling straight into every American household. And how is the White House responding? With a single, endlessly repeated slogan, short-term pain for long-term gain. Independent analyst Danny just dropped a devastating 4/7 second compilation that is already going viral. In it, you see Trump himself, then his Treasury Secretary, then Fox News anchors, then Republican lawmakers, all of them, one after another, reciting the exact same phrase, like a North Korean state broadcast. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Short-term pain for long-term gain. It is eerie. It is mechanical. And it is being pushed as the official explanation for why your gas bill just jumped 14% in a single week. Scott Ritter, the former Marine intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector who has been right about every major American miscalculation since Iraq, did not mince words when he addressed this exact narrative just 2 days ago. This is North Korean-style propaganda, Ritter said. The American people are being told to accept skyrocketing energy costs, dead soldiers, and a wider war because someday, somehow, there will be a magical long-term gain. Meanwhile, the mainstream media, what's left of it, has abandoned any pretense of independence. They are simply repeating the White House talking points. This is not journalism, this is state television. He is right. Turn on any legacy network right now and you will not hear about the 7 American deaths confirmed by the New York Times. You will not hear detailed analysis of Iran's doubled missile barrages. Instead, you get carefully framed segments about Iranian aggression and Trump's bold leadership. The same outlets that spent years fact-checking every Trump statement are now acting as unpaid press secretaries for a war that is already spiraling out of control. Let's be brutally honest about what this slogan really means. Short-term pain is not abstract. It is working families deciding whether to fill the tank or buy groceries. It is truckers watching their profit margins evaporate. It is airlines quietly raising fares and manufacturers warning of layoffs. And the long-term gain, no one in the administration has defined it. Not once. There is no detailed plan on the table for a post-regime change Middle East that magically stabilizes oil flows and brings peace. There is only hope, the same hope that was sold before Iraq, before Libya, before every previous adventure that ended in strategic disaster. This is not leadership. This is denial wrapped in marketing. The Trump team is betting that if they repeat the phrase enough times, the public will simply accept higher prices at the pump, more American casualties, and a conflict that is already costing far more than anyone predicted. Meanwhile, the corporate media owned by the same interests that profit from endless conflict obligingly amplifies the message without asking the hard questions. Remember, this is the same administration that promised the American people no new wars. Yet here we are, less than 3 months into the new term, watching the most expensive energy crisis in a generation unfold while pundits on cable news chuckle and say, "This is the price of strength." Scott Ritter called it correctly. America no longer has a truly free press on foreign policy. What we have is a coordinated echo chamber that protects the narrative at all costs. And right now, that narrative is crumbling under the weight of reality, dead Americans, burning oil facilities, and an Iranian response that has already doubled in intensity. The American people deserve better than slogans. They deserve the truth. And the truth is this: the pain is here, it is real, and the promised long-term gain is nowhere in sight. But the deeper truth, the one the White House and its echo chamber refuse to confront, is far more devastating than exploding gas prices or scripted slogans. Strategically, the United States and Israel lost this conflict the moment the first Iranian missile left its launcher. Let me be crystal clear, this was never supposed to happen. The entire American-Israeli plan rested on a single, arrogant assumption that a surprise decapitation strike combined with overwhelming air and missile superiority would shatter Iran's command structure, fracture its society, and force regime collapse within days. That assumption died the instant Tehran's response wave began. From the opening hours, Iran executed what military analysts now call a full-spectrum saturation strike, not random retaliation, but a meticulously pre-planned, multi-domain operation that exposed every flaw in Washington's wargaming. And because of that single, irreversible miscalculation, we are now watching the slow-motion strategic collapse of American power projection in the Middle East. Let's break down exactly why we lost from the first missile and what that means for President Trump and the United States. First, the intelligence failure was catastrophic. American and Israeli planners believed that years of sanctions, cyber operations, and targeted killings had left Iran's military hollowed out and its leadership divided. They were wrong on every count. Tehran had spent the last decade quietly building a redundant, hardened command and control network dispersed across underground facilities, mobile launchers, and proxy networks that no single strike could neutralize. The first Iranian salvo, more than 400 ballistic missiles and 600 drones in coordinated waves, proved that Iran's decision-making cycle remained intact while ours began to fracture. Second, the technological mismatch became obvious within hours. Iran did not fire blindly. They used low observable drones to suppress radar networks across the Gulf, then followed with ballistic missiles that performed terminal stage maneuvers our current interceptors were never designed to handle. The result? Overwhelming saturation that forced every defensive battery into overload. American and Israeli systems, once considered invincible on paper, suddenly looked obsolete in real time. That single development changed the entire calculus of regional power overnight. Third, and this is the part that will haunt Trump's presidency, the political blowback inside Iran was the exact opposite of what was predicted. The strike was meant to trigger internal revolt. Instead, it produced the strongest national cohesion Tehran has seen in decades. Hardliners and reformists, military and civilian, Shia and minority groups all rallied behind the flag the moment foreign missiles struck sovereign soil. The regime did not crumble, it consolidated. And every subsequent Iranian strike now carries the moral authority of a nation defending itself against aggression. That unity is a direct consequence of the first missile, and it is a nightmare scenario for any administration betting on regime change. Now let's talk consequences, because they are already landing like hammer blows on the Trump administration and the United States itself. Politically, Trump's domestic base is starting to crack. The same voters who cheered no new wars in 2024 are now watching American casualties mount and energy prices spike. Internal polling leaks show approval on foreign policy dropping 18 points in just 10 days, the fastest collapse of any modern president during an active conflict. Republican senators who once lined up behind him are now quietly asking for exit ramps. The MAGA coalition that delivered the White House is fracturing between isolationist America First voices and the neoconservative hawks who pushed this operation. Trump finds himself trapped in the middle, forced to defend a war he promised to avoid, exactly the political quicksand he mocked Biden for in 2024. Economically, the damage is compounding daily. Beyond the oil shock we already discussed, global supply chains are seizing up. Insurance rates for Gulf shipping have quadrupled. European allies are quietly diverting LNG contracts away from US exporters to secure their own winter supplies. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is facing its first serious stress test since 2008. Not because of inflation alone, but because sovereign wealth funds in Asia are now openly questioning America's ability to guarantee energy security in the region it claims to dominate. Every day this drags on, the economic long-term gain Trump keeps promising looks more like a distant fantasy. Militarily, the strain is already visible. The U.S. Navy has surged 3 carrier strike groups into the region, an enormous commitment of resources that leaves the Indo-Pacific thinner than at any point since the Obama pivot. Forward-deployed Patriot and THAAD batteries are burning through interceptors at unsustainable rates. Logistics tails are stretched across thousands of miles, and the Air Force is already reporting readiness dips in non-deployed squadrons. This is not sustainable great power competition posture. This is emergency overstretch, and every additional week of fighting accelerates the wear on equipment and personnel that will take years to rebuild. Geopolitically, the first missile moment has already shifted alliances in ways that will outlast this administration. Russia and China are not sitting idle. Moscow has increased arms shipments to Iran through the Caspian route, while Beijing is openly offering diplomatic cover at the United Nations and quietly buying discounted Iranian oil that Western sanctions can no longer stop. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, once enthusiastic partners in the anti-Iran coalition, are now hedging, reopening quiet back channels to Tehran. Even our traditional European allies are issuing carefully worded statements calling for de-escalation rather than standing shoulder to shoulder. America's aura of invincibility, carefully cultivated for 80 years, cracked with that first Iranian launch. Rebuilding it will cost far more than any short-term military victory could ever deliver. And perhaps most dangerously for Trump personally, the clock is ticking on his political capital. Midterm elections are less than 2 years away. If this conflict drags into a prolonged war of attrition, which every serious war game now predicts, the American public will not forgive a president who sold them short-term pain and delivered only endless cost. History is littered with leaders who bet their legacy on Middle East regime change gambles. Trump now finds himself in the same chapter as Bush 43 and Obama, except this time the adversary is far more capable, far better prepared, and far less isolated than anyone in Washington was willing to admit. This is why I say, without hesitation or exaggeration, that the strategic defeat was baked in from the very first missile. Every subsequent American move, every additional strike package, every new sanctions round, every press conference is now damage control, not victory pursuit. The initiative passed to Iran the moment their launchers spoke. And once you lose the initiative in a peer-level confrontation, regaining it requires either overwhelming escalation or humiliating de-escalation. There is no third option. The Trump administration still talks as if it controls the tempo. The facts on the ground say otherwise, and that gap between rhetoric and reality is widening by the hour. The economic consequences of that miscalculation are now hitting the United States and the global economy with brutal speed. In a single day, the national average price of gasoline in America jumped from $3.11 to $3.41 per gallon, the largest 2 4-hour spike since the 2008 financial crisis. Worse is yet to come. Iran has just closed the Strait of Hormuz. Tanker traffic has halted. Production in Kuwait, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the Baku fields has already shut down. More than 20% of the world's daily oil supply is now offline. For the United States, this is no longer a manageable energy disruption. It is the beginning of a full spectrum economic shock, soaring inflation, collapsing consumer confidence, and supply chain paralysis that will reach every corner of American life far faster than any long-term gain can possibly offset. And as this economic shockwave spreads across the globe, the military reality on the ground is even more sobering. The systems that were supposed to shield American and Israeli assets from harm have not simply struggled, they have failed in a manner that reveals deep structural flaws in the entire Western approach to missile defense. Let me walk you through the technical reasons why the Patriot, Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 3 all fell short, because this is not about isolated incidents. This is about systems that were outclassed from the moment the first Iranian salvo began. The first problem is fundamental interoperability. These four systems were never engineered as a single unified network. The US Patriot PAC-3 relies on the Link 16 tactical data link and its own AN-MPQ-65 radar. The Israeli Iron Dome uses the EL-M2084 radar and a proprietary command system optimized for short-range rockets. David Sling bridges medium-range threats with the Stunner interceptor and its own data fusion. Arrow 3 is built for upper-tier intercepts with the Green Pine radar and unique exo-atmospheric guidance. When operating together in real time, the data handoff is incomplete. Track files are not shared with perfect synchronization. One system's confirmed target is another's ghost. In a saturation attack involving hundreds of incoming threats, this fragmentation creates lethal blind spots. Iranian planners knew this and designed their barrage to exploit exactly those gaps. The second issue is the age of the underlying technology. The Patriot program began in the 1970s as an anti-aircraft system against Soviet bombers and cruise missiles. Even the latest PAC-3 MSE version is an evolutionary upgrade, not a clean sheet design. Software updates are slow and expensive. The same is true for the Israeli systems. Iron Dome, while highly effective against unguided rockets in limited salvos, still relies on technology whose core architecture is decades old. David Sling and Arrow 3, although more advanced, still suffer from the same incremental update cycle. The threat environment has evolved faster than the upgrade path. When adversaries introduce new capabilities faster than you can patch your systems, you are always one step behind. The decisive factor, however, is the advanced capability of Iranian ballistic missiles. These are not the simple, predictable Scud derivatives of the past. Modern Iranian designs, the Fateh 313, Khaybar Sheikhan, and their derivatives incorporate variable thrust engines that allow them to alter speed dramatically during flight. This breaks the interceptor's predicted intercept point calculation. More critically, in the terminal phase, they execute high G S-curve maneuvers, lateral accelerations exceeding 20 G in some reported cases. The Patriot PAC-3, Iron Dome Tamir, David Sling Stunner, and Arrow 3 all use hit-to-kill technology that requires precise, continuous tracking and minimal maneuvering from the target. When the incoming missile suddenly jinks in an S-curve pattern at hypersonic speeds, the interceptor's divert thrusters cannot compensate in time. The math is unforgiving. The kinetic energy required for a successful intercept is lost in milliseconds. But the failure wasn't just about individual missile performance. It was about the entire sensor network being blinded from the start. In the opening minutes of the conflict, Iran launched a wave of low observable drones and anti-radiation missiles specifically targeted at early warning and fire control radars. The AN, TPY, two forward-based radars, the Israeli EL, M2080 Green Pine, and supporting systems across the Gulf were either destroyed or forced offline. The Iranian systems that enabled this precision SEAD operation benefited directly from advanced radar and electronic warfare technology supplied and integrated with assistance from China and Russia. The result? The entire layered defense network went blind. Without accurate tracking data, the interceptors were firing blind or not at all. Patriot batteries exhausted their PAC-3 missiles on low-confidence shots. Iron Dome launchers were left defending against threats they couldn't see coming. David Sling and Arrow 3 were reduced to last-ditch efforts with minimal success rates. This technical collapse has immediate strategic consequences. With the defensive shield compromised, Iran now enjoys freedom of action across the region. In the coming days, we are likely to see follow-on strikes against additional targets: U.S. bases in Jordan and Iraq, Saudi oil infrastructure, and possibly even facilities in Azerbaijan. The cost asymmetry is staggering. Each Patriot PAC-3 interceptor costs over $4 million. Each Iron Dome Tamir round is roughly $50,000. Iranian missiles and drones cost a fraction of that, and they are being launched by the hundreds. This is not sustainable for the United States or Israel. The mathematics of the exchange rate favor Tehran. The systems that Washington and Tel Aviv once presented as invincible have been exposed as legacy platforms facing a peer-level threat they were never designed to counter. The first Iranian missile did not just hit a target, it exposed the obsolescence of an entire defensive philosophy. And once that exposure is public, the strategic initiative passes permanently to the other side. And that loss of initiative has now translated directly into a material collapse that can only be described in one phrase: game over for the current American and Israeli defensive posture. U.S. forces in the Gulf and Levant have completely exhausted their supply of PAC-3 interceptors, the only version capable of handling modern ballistic threats. What remains in theater are older PAC-2 missiles, which were designed for 1980s-era Scud threats and are effectively useless against the maneuvering Iranian weapons we are seeing today. Resupply from continental U.S. Stocks will take weeks, and production lines cannot keep pace with the expenditure rate. Israel's situation is even more dire. The Iron Dome batteries defending major population centers have fired their last Tamir interceptors. Emergency airlifts from American depots are already underway, but the logistics chain is vulnerable, and the numbers simply do not add up. David's sling and arrow systems are in the same precarious position, low on rounds, with no rapid replenishment in sight. Meanwhile, Iran retains a massive strategic depth. According to every available intelligence assessment, Tehran still possesses enough ballistic missiles for at least 6 more months of sustained high-intensity barrages and enough drones for 18 months of continuous operations. Their production facilities, many of them deeply buried and dispersed, continue to operate under cover of the very air defense umbrella that has now blinded the other side. This is not just a numbers game. This is the OODA loop in action. Observe, orient, decide, act. Iran is operating inside the American and Israeli decision cycle. While Washington and Tel Aviv are still debating resupply priorities and revising target lists, Tehran has already observed the depletion, oriented its next wave, decided on the optimal timing, and acted. The result is a tempo that the coalition cannot match. The mathematics and the momentum have both spoken. For the first time in modern history, the United States and Israel face a peer adversary that can outlast them in a missile duel. Game over is no longer a prediction, it is the present reality. That game over reality is now playing out in the streets of Israel itself. Tel Aviv has been plunged into darkness for the 3rd consecutive night. Power grids are failing under sustained precision strikes. Sirens no longer even attempt to keep up with the tempo of incoming threats. The Iron Dome that once defined Israeli security has gone silent, its launchers empty, its radars blinded. Reports confirm that the official residences of Prime Minister Netanyahu and National Security Minister Ben-Gvir have both taken direct hits. The images coming out are stark. Shattered windows, emergency crews in the streets, a government that promised absolute superiority now forced to operate from bunkers. Let me speak plainly. As someone who has spent decades studying this conflict from every angle, I will never shed a tear for anybody in Israel today. Not because I wish harm on civilians, I do not, but because those who chose to remain in Israel long after the warnings were clear have made themselves active participants in the greater Israel policy that has defined the nation's trajectory for decades. This is not ancient history. This is the modern expansionist project, settlement after settlement, operation after operation, that many serious analysts have compared to the darkest expansionist ideologies of the 20th century. The same logic of security through dominance that history has judged with unforgiving clarity. The Israeli people were told their military edge was eternal. They were told the world would always back them. They were told the Palestinians, the Iranians, the entire region could be managed through superior force. Today, that illusion lies in ruins along with their power grid and their leadership compounds. There is no joy in watching any society suffer. But there is a cold, historical reckoning when a nation that built its identity on never again becoming victims chooses instead to become the very architect of perpetual conflict. And today, that reckoning has arrived. This reckoning inside Israel is only the visible tip of a much larger strategic collapse that now threatens to pull in other major powers. The most glaring example of short-sighted betrayal comes from India. Under Prime Minister Modi, New Delhi quietly provided Israel with real-time coordinates of Iranian naval vessels in the Arabian Sea during the opening phase of the conflict. This was not an act of neutrality. With the Strait of Hormuz closed and Tehran now targeting vessels linked to countries that aided Israel, Indian tankers are already facing higher insurance premiums and rerouting delays that will add billions to fuel costs. Refineries in Gujarat and Maharashtra are preparing contingency plans for shutdowns. The rupee is sliding, inflation is spiking, and Modi's carefully cultivated image of strategic autonomy is cracking under the weight of his own backroom decisions. It was active intelligence support for one side in a war that Tehran had every right to view as existential. Iran has already labeled it a direct stab in the back after years of economic partnership and energy deals that kept Indian refineries running. The economic blowback for India will be severe and immediate. Iranian oil makes up nearly 10% of India's imports. History has shown again and again, when you choose tactical alignment with a declining power over long-term relationships in your own region, the price is paid in lost markets, higher energy bills, and diplomatic isolation. China is watching this unfold with clinical precision. Beijing has already drawn the obvious lesson: never concede an inch to Trump-style pressure. The moment Washington demanded that China curb its purchases of discounted Iranian oil, Beijing doubled down instead. They understand what Modi apparently did, not that yielding now invites endless future demands. Chinese state media is already framing the conflict as proof that American power projection is brittle and that multipolar realities are here to stay. Expect China to accelerate its own military modernization, deepen ties with Iran, and quietly expand its naval presence in the Indian Ocean. The message to every capital from Riyadh to Ankara is clear. Align too closely with Washington's gamble and you risk becoming collateral damage. And because Iran now holds the initiative, the next phase is already visible on the horizon. Flush with momentum. Tehran has signaled that any nation providing material or intelligence support to the US-Israeli axis will face consequences. We are likely to see expanded strikes against the US, facilities in Jordan and Iraq, renewed pressure on Saudi infrastructure, and even limited operations against Azerbaijan's energy assets. The war is no longer contained. It is metastasizing exactly as any serious strategist predicted once the first Iranian missile proved the defensive shield was an illusion. This is the deeper failure of the entire campaign. It has not only failed to weaken Iran, it has accelerated the very realignment of global power that Washington most fears. This larger strategic collapse points to a future that is now brutally clear. Iran has stated it will not stop its operations until every American force has withdrawn from the region and Israel no longer poses an existential threat. The tempo of strikes will continue, calibrated to maintain pressure without unnecessary escalation. Should Israel, in desperation, cross the ultimate threshold and employ nuclear weapons, Iranian doctrine is explicit. A response of just 3 warheads would be sufficient to end the Israeli state as we know it and render large parts of the Gulf uninhabitable for generations. The war is no longer about victory. It is about survival and deterrence on a scale the world has never witnessed. What do you think happens next? Will Washington finally choose de-escalation, or will it double down and drag the entire region and perhaps the global economy into the abyss? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. This is Max AfterWar. Stay sharp.